Part 2, Red, War 1776. Weapons. A single rifle, something every frontier family needed, something that was an absolute necessity, might take a year or more, and a year's wages to get from one of the rare gunsmiths, located perhaps miles away. This was the only weapon many of the rebels carried into battle against the British. The firearm used to the British Army was called the Brown Bess musket. It was a smooth bore and fired a round ball of 75 caliber, approximately 3/4 of an inch in diameter, with a black powder charge ignited by flint that pushed the ball at 700 or 800 feet per second when it left the muzzle. Modern rifles send the bullet out at just over 3,000 feet per second. Because a round ball fired from a smooth bore is so pitifully inaccurate, the ball bounces off the side of the bore as it progresses down the barrel. The Brown Bess was really only good out to about 50 yards. The ball would vary in flight so widely that it was common for a soldier to aim at one man coming at him and hit another man 4 feet to the left or right. With the Brown Bess, each British soldier was issued a bayonet nearly 3 feet long that twists locked to the end of the barrel and turned the empty weapon into a kind of attacking pike. Along with personal weapons, the British Army employed artillery, small field cannon, which fired plain round balls exploding shells and grape shot. Scores of round musket balls packed on the bore to make the cannon into something like a giant shotgun. Grape shot was so viciously effective against columns of marching men that its destruction would not be duplicated until the use of the rapid-fire machine gun in the First World War. Whole ranks of attacking men could be torn to pieces in a single shot, the musket ball passing through man after man, ripping them apart. Okay, guys, so the soldiers on the frontier, they didn't have the most modern weapons. Their weapons weren't super accurate, and it took a long time for them to either earn the money to buy it, and then they had to walk miles and miles to the gunsmith in order to get it, to buy it, or to get it made for them. So the British was at a big advantage when it came to this. All right, chapter 4. Samuel smelled it before he saw anything. Not just the smoke from the fires, but the thick, heavy blood. The thick, heavy smell. Blood. Death. No. The single word took over his brain. Part of his thinking was automatic, leading him to act with caution, move with stealth. But the front part, the thinking part, hung on to one word. No. He'd made good time running hard until his lungs seemed to be on fire, then jogging until he got his breath, then back to the full-out run. There was probably another half hour of daylight before it was too dark to see. As he approached the settlement, he slowed and moved off to the side. It would do no good to run head-on if the attackers were still there. Excuse me. He was silent, listening keenly. Surely if anyone was still there, they would make some noise. All Samuel heard was the crackling of fire, the soft night sounds of evening birds. No human sounds. At the edge of the clearing near his home, he paused, frightened, no, terrified at what he would find. He was hidden in some branches, and he studied the area through the leaves to make sure it was clear before he stepped out. The cabin was gone. Burned to the ground, side shed and all. Here and there an ember flickered and crackled, and smoke rose into the evening sky, but the building was no more. In the distance he could see that the other cabins, scattered through the clearing, had been burned as well. Dreading what he might find, he forced himself to search the ashes, looking for the slightest indication of bodies. He could not bring himself to think about what he was really looking for. His parents. His brain would not allow it. Though he knew the death smell came from someone, he could not allow himself to believe it was from them, from mother and father. He found nothing in the ashes, and when he spread the search around the cabin, moving in greater circles, he still found no trace that might have been his parents. But as the search loop widened, he began to come across bodies. his neighbors, shot down and hacked where they'd fallen. They did not look like they had been people. What he found seemed more like trash, paper, and cloth blown across the ground. But they were people, friends and families he had known. A frantic need took him, the thought that the next body might be the one he dreaded most to find, and he ran from one to another trying to identify them in the failing light. Most had been mutilated so badly it was hard to tell who they'd once been. Overton lay by his cabin, his shirt sleeves still not down on his wrist, chest and stomach filled with arrows, his scalp gone so his face drooped without the top skin to hold it up. Samuel ran from body to body in the gathering twilight until at last there were no more bodies to find. No matter how fast he ran, how wide he ran, he did not find his parents. Along with 6 or 7 others, they had not been killed, or at least not been killed here. They had been taken away. They had not been killed. He clung to that thought. They had not been killed. Why does he keep telling himself that? He stood, his breathing ragged, sobbing softly. Twice he had thrown up, and the smell and taste mixed with the tears of frustration and grief for his friends, and rage for what had been done to them. He knew that if he lived to be 100, he would never lose the taste, the smell, or the images of what he had seen, the madness of what men could do to other men in a savage rage. Dark caught him now. He had circled through the settlement and was back at his own cabin, or where it had been. There was nothing left that would furnish light. All of the candles had melted, but he trapped some of the embers that were still glowing and made a campfire off from the cabin a bit. In its light he found the woodpile, which oddly had not been burned, and at the side of the pile there was a stack of pine pitch knots and roots that his mother had used to start fires. The pitch concentrated and the knots burned with a smoky hot flame that lasted for an hour or more and would work as a torch. Near the garden plot he found the oak shovel that they had used to turn the earth for gardening. The attackers had overlooked it or left it as useless because anything of value had been taken or destroyed. There were 9 bodies to be buried before the coyotes, wolves, and bears came. He knew that he would be moving come daylight, tracking, looking for sign, so the burying had to be done tonight. Carrying spare pine knots and the shovel, he went from body to body. He dug a shallow grave next to each one, knowing that it might not be enough to protect them, that scavengers might dig them up, but so pressed for time that he had no choice. He covered each as best he could. 3 were children, and did not take as long, and though it was hard to tell exactly who they were in the dark, and with the condition of the bodies, he remembered the children laughing and playing in the front of the Olafsons' cabin. 2 boys and a little girl with a crude doll. He found the doll in the grass and wept as he buried it with the smallest body. He cried over each corpse, thinking of them living, thinking of them meeting in the cabin and living and talking and laughing and just being. And now all were gone, gone. He could not stop crying, thinking of his parents, wondering, worrying. It took 5 hours to bury everyone. It was still dark when he finished and looked around. Then he realized that he should have said something over the bodies. He did not know the right words, something about ashes and dust, but he took another torch, went back to each grave, and bowed his head and said, "Please, Lord, take them with you, please." It was all he could think to say, and he hoped it was enough. He went back to the campfire by his own cabin site and sat looking into the flames, praying for safety for his parents and the others who had not been killed, praying for all who survived, but praying most for his parents, squatting there by the fire, also praying for daylight to come so he could begin looking for them. In an hour and a half, a little more, his eyes closed and sleep came and took him down, until he was lying on his side by the fire, sleeping deeply with all the bad dreams that he'd known would come, sleeping with twitches and jerks and whimpers, and then just sleeping. Sleep. So, we know that These soldiers have come to their settlement, their home. They've burned all of their homes and they've killed many of the people there. He said there were seven, I believe he said there were seven people that he could not find, and two of those were his parents. So he is hoping that that means that they weren't killed, that they were taken, and that he's going to be able to find them. What do you do? What would you do now? Where do you go from here? That's what I want you to respond. If you're Samuel, what do you do now?